Laurent Girard, a 50-year-old man, was walking through the elegant streets of Paris towards Place Vendôme. The afternoon sun reflected off the shop windows surrounding the square, creating an almost blinding shine. Laurent, with his calloused hands and oil-stained clothes, stood out starkly against the refined surroundings. As he approached the Cartier jewelry store, Laurent hesitated for a moment. He looked at his own clothes, a faded plaid shirt, worn-out jeans, and old work boots. Grease and oil stains covered much of the fabric, silent witnesses to a hard day in the mechanic's workshop. He ran his hand through his graying, disheveled hair, trying to give it some order, but soon gave up with a resigned shrug. With a deep sigh, Laurent pushed open the heavy glass door and entered the jewelry store. The contrast between the outside world and the interior of the shop was striking. The polished marble floor reflected the soft lights illuminating the showcases filled with dazzling jewelry. The air was filled with a delicate and expensive fragrance. As soon as Laurent crossed the threshold, all eyes turned to him. The silence that followed was almost palpable. An elegant lady wearing a Chanel suit and holding a Hermès bag raised her hand to her mouth in a gesture of poorly disguised shock. Her companion, a man in an impeccable suit, frowned and murmured something in her ear. The shop assistants, immaculate in their black and gold uniforms, exchanged nervous glances. A young saleswoman, no more than 25 years old, let out a giggle, which she quickly tried to disguise with a cough. Her colleague, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, looked at her disapprovingly before turning his attention back to Laurent. "Excuse me, sir," the employee said, approaching Laurent cautiously. "May I help you with something?" Laurent opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by a loud comment from one of the customers. "Mon Dieu! What's this? A beggar invaded Cartier," exclaimed a burly man wearing a tailored Italian suit. His voice echoed through the store, provoking muffled laughter and disdainful looks. Laurent felt his face burn but maintained his composure. He turned to the man who had made the comment and said calmly, "I'm not a beggar, monsieur. I'm a mechanic, and I have just as much right to be here as you do." Laurent's declaration provoked a new wave of whispers and giggles among those present. A young woman, holding a glass of champagne, commented to her friend, "A mechanic in Cartier? What a joke. He probably came into the wrong place looking for car parts." Laurent ignored the malicious comments and walked toward one of the showcases. He could feel the disdainful glances burning on his back, but he refused to be intimidated. After all, he had a purpose for being there and wouldn't let the judgment of others stop him from accomplishing his mission. As he examined the displayed jewels, Laurent heard a shrill voice behind him, "Security. Where's security? We can't have this type of person here. It's absurd." Laurent turned slowly, facing the woman who had made the comment. She stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the mechanic's steady and dignified gaze. For a moment, silence reigned in the store, broken only by the soft clinking of jewels being handled by some nervous customers. At that moment, Laurent noticed movement at the back of the store. A tall, well-dressed man was emerging from a door marked "Employees Only." His stride was decisive, and his face showed an expression of barely contained irritation. Laurent knew things were about to get even more interesting. The man who emerged from the back door was François, the manager of Cartier. His impeccable gray suit and rigid posture exuded authority. He crossed the store with firm steps, his eyes fixed on Laurent. "Monsieur," François began, his voice as cold and sharp as ice, "I must ask you to leave immediately. This is a high-end jewelry store, not a mechanic's workshop." Laurent turned calmly to face François. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the silence in the store was absolute. Everyone present was watching the scene, anxiously waiting for the outcome. "Good afternoon, monsieur," Laurent responded with surprising tranquility. "I understand your concern, but I assure you I'm here as a customer. I'd like to see the most expensive ring in the store, please." François blinked, momentarily disconcerted by the unexpected response. He looked Laurent up and down, his eyes lingering on the oil stains and worn clothes. "Monsieur," François said, regaining his composure, "I'm afraid there is a misunderstanding. Our pieces are extremely valuable and—" Laurent interrupted him gently. "I'm aware of that. That's why I'm here. I insist on seeing the most expensive ring you have." A murmur swept through the store. Customers exchanged incredulous looks, some openly laughing at the mechanic's audacity. François seemed to be struggling internally, torn between his professional duty and his evident desire to expel Laurent. "Very well," François finally conceded, a disdainful smile forming on his lips. "If you insist, I'll show you. But I must warn you, the price is far beyond what a mechanic could afford." Laurent nodded, ignoring the provocation. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing it." François gestured to one of the employees, who quickly went to a safe at the back of the store. While they waited, the manager couldn't help but express his contempt. "You know, monsieur," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "we usually reserve this kind of service for regular customers. People who truly appreciate the value of our pieces." Laurent remained calm, his eyes wandering around the store. "And how do you determine who can appreciate the value of a jewel, monsieur? By the clothes they wear? By the car they drive?" François laughed, a cold and humorless sound. "Among other things, yes. Appearance says a lot about a person, don't you think?" Before Laurent could respond, the employee returned with a small black velvet box. François took it with reverence and opened it before Laurent. "Here it is, monsieur," he announced with a dramatic flourish, "the most expensive and exclusive ring in our collection. A 5-carat pink diamond, uniquely cut, set in platinum with small white diamonds around it. Its price? A mere 2.5 million euros. An astonished silence fell over the store. All eyes were fixed on the dazzling ring that shone brightly under the showcase lights. Laurent leaned in to examine the jewel more closely, his trained eyes studying every detail attentively. "Magnificent," he murmured, genuinely impressed. "The cut is truly exceptional. And the color, extraordinary." François seemed momentarily surprised by the knowledge demonstrated by Laurent, but he quickly regained his arrogant demeanor. "Yes, well," he said, closing the box with a snap, "it's a piece for connoisseurs. Now that you've seen it, perhaps it's time to look for something more suitable for your budget. We have some silver pieces in the showcase near the exit." Stifled laughter echoed through the store. Laurent, however, maintained his dignity. He looked directly into François' eyes, his face a mask of calm. "Thank you for your attention, monsieur," Laurent said. "I'll consider my decision." At that moment, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the store, making everyone turn toward the entrance. What Laurent saw made his heart race. 3 masked and armed men had invaded Cartier. The sound of shattering glass reverberated through Cartier, followed by screams of panic from customers and staff. The 3 masked men, dressed entirely in black, moved quickly through the store, their weapons pointed threateningly at everyone present. "Everyone on the ground, now," shouted the leader of the robbers, his hoarse voice echoing off the marble walls. Chaos ensued instantly. Customers threw themselves to the ground, women screamed hysterically, and the employees, paralyzed by fear, could barely move. François, the arrogant manager, was pale as wax, his eyes wide with terror. Laurent, for his part, remained surprisingly calm. He slowly crouched down, his eyes alertly watching every movement of the robbers. Years of experience told him the situation was extremely volatile. "You," one of the robbers shouted, pointing at a security guard who was trying discreetly to reach his radio. "Don't even think about it. Hands where I can see them." The guard froze, raising his hands tremulously. The robber approached, ripping the radio and gun from the man's possession and tossing them aside. Meanwhile, the leader of the group turned to François, who was still holding the box with the pink diamond ring. "Open all the safes, now," he ordered, pressing the barrel of his gun against the manager's forehead. "And don't even think about triggering any silent alarms, or I'll redecorate this lovely store with your brains." Francois stammered an affirmative response, his hands shaking violently as he tried to guide the robbers to the safes. Laurent watched everything attentively, his mind working rapidly to assess the situation. At that moment, Laurent heard the whispered comments around him. An elegant woman, now crouched on the floor with her pearl necklace clutched between her fingers, murmured to her friend, "I bet it was that filthy mechanic who attracted these criminals here. He's probably their accomplice." "You're right," replied the friend, casting a disdainful look at Laurent. "What kind of decent person would walk into a luxury jewelry store like that? He must have given the signal to the robbers." Laurent felt a pang of hurt from the unfair accusations, but he kept his expression neutral. He knew prejudice was an enemy just as dangerous as the armed men now looting the store. The third robber began collecting jewels from the showcases, tossing them into a large black bag. The sound of glass breaking and metal clinking filled the air, mingling with the muffled sobs of the terrified hostages. "Hurry up," the leader shouted at Francois, who struggled to open one of the safes with his trembling hands. "We don't have all day." Laurent noticed that the robber closest to him was becoming increasingly nervous. His finger trembled on the gun's trigger, and his darting eyes revealed his growing agitation. "Hey, you," the nervous robber suddenly shouted, pointing at Laurent. "Why are you so calm? What are you hiding?" Laurent slowly raised his hands, maintaining eye contact with the criminal. "I'm not hiding anything," he replied with a firm and calm voice. "I'm just trying not to make the situation worse." The robber approached, his gun pointed directly at Laurent's chest. "Get up. Let's see what you have in your pockets." Laurent complied calmly, rising with slow and deliberate movements. The robber began frisking him roughly, cursing when he found only a worn wallet and some mechanic's tools. "What's this?" he grunted, holding up a wrench. "Planning to use this as a weapon?" "It's just a tool," Laurent explained patiently. "I'm a mechanic, remember?" The robber looked at Laurent's oil-stained clothes, then at his calm face. For a moment, confusion replaced aggression in his eyes. At that critical moment, a piercing scream cut through the air. One of the customers, unable to contain her panic any longer, had gone into hysterics. The robber holding Laurent turned abruptly toward the sound, momentarily distracted. It was in that brief second of distraction that Laurent saw his chance. With surprising speed and precision for a man of his age and appearance, he grabbed the robber's wrist, twisting it forcefully. The gun fell to the floor with a dull thud. The ensuing chaos was immediate and deafening. The sound of the gun hitting Cartier's marble floor seemed to echo for an eternity. For a moment, time seemed frozen. All eyes turned to Laurent and the disarmed robber, disbelief etched on the faces of those present. Laurent, taking advantage of the element of surprise, moved with astonishing agility. In a fluid motion, he twisted the robber's arm behind his back, effectively immobilizing him. The criminal screamed in pain and surprise, struggling in vain against the mechanic's firm grip. "Let him go now, or everyone here dies," bellowed the leader of the robbers, pointing his gun directly at Francois' head, who paled even more. Laurent, however, remained calm. His eyes quickly scanned the environment, assessing the situation. The third robber, caught off guard, had momentarily lowered his guard, his weapon pointing at the floor as he looked confusedly at his captured companion. "Think carefully," Laurent said with a surprisingly authoritative voice. "You have hostages, but now I have one of you. Let's talk about this civilly." The leader of the robbers laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Talk. You think you're in a position to negotiate, old man?" As he spoke, the leader made a subtle gesture to the third robber, who began to slowly move toward Laurent. However, Laurent noticed the movement from the corner of his eye. With impressive speed, Laurent pushed the robber he held towards the one approaching. The two collided forcefully, falling to the ground in a tangle of arms and legs. Taking advantage of the confusion, Laurent dove, rolling on the floor and grabbing the fallen gun. Rising to a shooting position, Laurent pointed the weapon at the leader of the robbers. "Now we're on equal footing," he said, his voice firm and controlled. The leader of the robbers hesitated, clearly surprised by the turn of events. His gaze alternated between Laurent and the two fallen accomplices, who were struggling to get up. "Who the hell are you?" the leader asked, confusion evident in his voice. Laurent gave a small smile. "Just a mechanic who doesn't like to see innocent people threatened." At that moment, the two fallen robbers finally managed to stand up. One of them quickly recovered his weapon, pointing it at Laurent. The tension in the room was palpable. The customers and staff, still crouched on the floor, watched the scene with a mixture of fear and admiration. François, the manager, seemed to be in shock, his eyes wide fixed on Laurent. "You still have a chance to get out of here," Laurent said calmly, his eyes never leaving the leader of the robbers. "Drop the weapons and surrender. The police are surely on their way." As if to confirm his words, the distant sound of sirens began echoing outside. Panic began to set in the robbers' eyes. "He's bluffing," shouted one of the robbers. "Let's take him out and get out of here." The leader, however, seemed to be re-evaluating the situation. His eyes narrowed as he studied Laurent more carefully. "You're not just a simple mechanic, are you?" he asked, a tone of reluctant respect in his voice. Laurent didn't answer, maintaining his firm stance and weapon pointed. The sound of sirens was getting louder. Time was running out for the robbers. "Boss, we have to go," shouted one of the other robbers, panic evident in his voice. The leader looked once more at Laurent, then at François, who still had a gun pointed at his head. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to pull the trigger. At that critical moment, Laurent made his most audacious move. "Paris police," he shouted with authority. "Drop your weapons and lie down on the ground with your hands on your heads." The reaction was immediate. The most nervous robber threw his gun to the ground and lay prone, his hands trembling as he placed them behind his head. The other hesitated, looking at his leader for guidance. The leader of the robbers, however, kept his eyes fixed on Laurent. For a tense moment, they stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Then, slowly, he began lowering his weapon. The leader of the robbers lowered his weapon but didn't completely release it. His eyes, cold and calculating, never left Laurent's. In a quick, unexpected move, he grabbed François by the collar, pulling him close and pressing the gun barrel against his temple. "Nice bluff, cop," the leader taunted, emphasizing the last word with sarcasm. "But now it's my turn to negotiate. You're going to let us leave, or the manager here is going to need a brain cleaning." François let out a muffled groan, his face a mask of pure terror. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and his eyes silently pleaded with Laurent for help. Laurent maintained his calm demeanor, the gun still pointed firmly at the leader of the robbers. His mind worked quickly, evaluating all possible solutions to this dangerous situation. "Let's talk about this," Laurent said, his voice surprisingly calm. "There's no need for more violence. You're smart enough to know that killing a hostage would only worsen your situation." The leader of the robbers laughed bitterly. "And what do you know about my situation, huh? You're just an old mechanic playing hero." Laurent gave a small smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm more than I seem. Either way, I'm willing to listen to what you have to say." That response seemed to intrigue the robber. He narrowed his eyes, studying Laurent more closely. "Very well," he finally said. "Here's the deal, you let us leave with the jewels we've already taken, and no one gets hurt. Simple as that." Laurent nodded slowly as if considering the proposal. "And what happens to the manager?" "He comes with us as a guarantee. We'll release him when we're safe." Laurent pretended to think for a moment, then spoke, "I have a counter-proposal. You release the manager now, and I personally guarantee that you and your men will leave here safely." The leader of the robbers laughed. "And why would I trust you?" "Because I understand your situation better than you think," Laurent replied, his tone subtly changing. "You're not a killer. You're a skilled thief who found himself cornered. Killing the manager, you would cross a line from which there's no return." Something in Laurent's voice made the leader of the robbers hesitate. There was a knowledge, an understanding in his words that went beyond what one would expect from a simple mechanic. "Who are you really?" the robber asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming his aggression. Laurent took a step forward, lowering his gun slightly as a gesture of goodwill. "Someone who has been on the wrong side of the law and understands what you're going through. Believe me, there's a better way out of this situation." The leader of the robbers seemed to consider Laurent's words. His grip on François loosened slightly. "How can I be sure you're not deceiving me?" he asked, distrust still evident in his voice. Laurent smiled. "You can't. But think about it, if I really were a cop, would have called for reinforcements a long time ago. The fact that we're here, talking, shows that I'm willing to find a peaceful solution." The robber looked around, noticing for the first time that, indeed, no police had stormed the store. The sirens they had heard before seemed to have moved away. Slowly, very slowly, he began to move the gun away from François' head. "And how exactly do you propose to solve this?" he asked, his voice now more of a whisper than a threat. Laurent took another step forward, his voice taking on an almost paternal tone. "First, let's all calm down. Release the manager, and we'll talk like civilized people. I promise I'll do everything possible to ensure you and your men leave here safely." For a tense moment, the leader of the robbers seemed to struggle internally. His eyes went from Laurent to François, to his fallen accomplices, and back to Laurent. Finally, with a deep sigh, he pushed François away and completely lowered his weapon. "I hope you know what you're doing, old man," he said, a mix of resignation and respect in his voice. Laurent nodded gravely. "Believe me, I know exactly what I'm doing." With the situation momentarily under control, Laurent quickly took charge. He moved with surprising authority, his posture and voice conveying years of experience in crisis management. "All right, let's do this the right way," Laurent announced, his voice echoing through the silent jewelry store. "First, I need everyone to stay calm. The police are certainly on their way, and we need to ensure no one gets hurt when they arrive." He turned to François, who was still visibly trembling after his experience as a hostage. "Monsieur, I need you to go to the store entrance and signal to the police that the situation is under control. Tell them not to storm but to send a negotiator." François hesitated for a moment, looking uncertainly at Laurent and then at the robbers. Laurent placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. I guarantee your safety." Nodding nervously, François headed for the store entrance, his legs still shaking. Laurent then turned to the robbers. "As for you, I need you to sit over there in the corner, where I can see you clearly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Surprisingly, the robbers complied without protest, moving slowly to the designated spot. The leader, however, kept his eyes fixed on Laurent, a mixture of curiosity and respect in his gaze. "Now," Laurent continued, addressing the customers and staff still crouched on the floor, "I want all of you to move calmly to the other side of the store. Stay calm and stick together." As people obeyed, murmurs of confusion and fear filled the air. Laurent heard snippets of conversations. "Who is that man? How does a mechanic know how to handle a situation like this? Is he really with the police?" Ignoring the comments, Laurent focused on the task at hand. He approached the entrance, where François was signaling to the police outside. "How's the situation outside?" Laurent asked. François, still pale, replied, They're asking to speak with whoever is in charge inside." Laurent nodded. "Great. Tell them I'm taking over the negotiations and will send our demands soon." François looked at Laurent with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Who are you really, monsieur?" Laurent gave a small smile. "Now's not the time for those questions. Trust me, I'm here to help." Turning his attention back inside the store, Laurent noticed that the leader of the robbers was watching him intently. "You really know what you're doing, don't you?" the leader asked, his voice a mix of admiration and distrust. Laurent approached him, speaking quietly so only the leader could hear. "I've been in worse situations than this. Believe me, I know exactly how to handle the police outside." The leader of the robbers frowned. "Why are you helping us? You could simply turn us in." Laurent looked into the man's eyes. "Because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. Including you." At that moment, the sound of a megaphone cut through the air from outside the store. "This is Captain Dubois of the Paris police. We are ready to negotiate. Please send your demands." Laurent straightened up, assuming a commanding posture. He addressed François, "Tell them we need an untraceable vehicle and safe passage to the airport. In exchange, we will release all hostages unharmed." François looked shocked at Laurent. But that's what the criminals want." Laurent placed a hand on François' shoulder. "Trust me. Sometimes, you have to take a step back to take 2 steps forward." While François relayed the message to the police, Laurent turned to the robbers. "You'll have your chance to get out of here. But when we get to the airport, you'll surrender peacefully. Understood?" The leader of the robbers studied Laurent for a long moment before slowly nodding. "Understood." Laurent then addressed the hostages. "Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to remain calm. This situation will be resolved soon, and you will all be able to go home safely." As the tension in the store slowly began to decrease, Laurent couldn't help but notice the looks of admiration and respect he now received from everyone present, including François and the robbers. The ragged mechanic who had entered the store hours ago had transformed into an unlikely hero, commanding the situation with a skill no one could have predicted. The hours that followed were tense, but Laurent maintained control of the situation with surprising calm. Following his instructions, the police provided an untraceable vehicle, and the robbers, along with Laurent, left the Cartier jewelry store under the astonished gazes of the newly freed hostages and police officers. At the airport, as agreed, the robbers surrendered peacefully. Laurent watched them being taken away by the police, a look of understanding on his wrinkled face. As the last one passed by him, the leader paused briefly. "Thank you," he murmured before being led away. Laurent simply nodded, a small smile on his lips. Minutes later, Laurent found himself surrounded by police officers, reporters, and onlookers. Captain Dubois, a burly man with an imposing mustache, approached him with an expression of admiration and confusion. "Monsieur," he began, "I must admit I'm impressed with your performance. But I have to ask, who are you really?" Laurent looked around, noting that all eyes were fixed on him, eagerly waiting for his response. He saw François, the Cartier manager, among the crowd, his face a mix of curiosity and shame. With a deep sigh, Laurent finally revealed his true identity. "My name is Laurent Girard. I was a detective with the Paris police for 30 years, specializing in hostage negotiations and high-profile crimes." A murmur of surprise swept through the crowd. Captain Dubois widened his eyes in recognition. "Laurent Girard? The legendary negotiator who resolved the Bourbon Diamond case in 2005? I thought you had retired." Laurent smiled. "I did, Captain. 5 years ago, to be exact. But the clothes, the oil stains." François stammered, taking a step forward. Laurent turned to him, his smile widening. "Ah, that. Well, after I retired, I decided to pursue my other passion, mechanics. I opened a small workshop in the 18th arrondissement. It's honest work and keeps me busy." The revelation caused a stir among those present. Journalists crowded around, firing questions rapidly. Why did you enter Cartier today? How did you feel being discriminated against by the staff and customers? Do you plan to return to active duty after this incident? Laurent raised his hands, asking for silence. When the commotion subsided, he spoke. I entered Cartier today to buy a birthday present for my wife. I didn't expect to get involved in a hostage situation, but when it happened, my police instincts took over. He paused, his eyes meeting Francois. As for the treatment I received, well, it was a valuable lesson for all of us about not judging people by their appearance. Francois lowered his gaze, clearly ashamed. And no, Laurent continued, I don't plan to return to active duty. I'm happy with my life as a mechanic. This incident was an exception, not the rule. Captain Dubois placed a hand on Laurent's shoulder. Monsieur Girard, on behalf of the Paris police, I would like to express our gratitude for your intervention today. You saved lives and resolved a potentially disastrous situation. Laurent nodded modestly. I just did what any responsible citizen would do, Captain. As the crowd continued to absorb the surprising revelation, Laurent noticed a familiar gleam in the eyes of some of the younger police officers. He recognized that look. It was the same one he had when he was a rookie, hearing stories of legendary detectives. With a gentle smile, he addressed them, remember, young ones, the true strength of a police officer is not in his gun or badge, but in his ability to understand and connect with people. Whether a criminal or a civilian, everyone has a story. Our job is to listen to those stories and find peaceful solutions whenever possible. Laurent's words were met with respectful nods and admiring looks. Even after years of retirement, he still had the power to inspire and educate. As the commotion began to subside and people slowly dispersed, Laurent found himself thinking of his mechanic's workshop. There was a car waiting for him, with a carburetor needing adjustment. With one last wave to the crowd, Laurent Girard, the legendary detective turned humble mechanic, walked toward the parking lot, eager to return to his new life, a life he had chosen and one that made him truly happy.